Hello, and welcome to the Church Revitalization podcast, brought to you by the Malphurs Group team, where each week we tackle important, actionable topics to help churches thrive. And now, here's your hosts, Scott Ball and AJ Matthew.
We have Greg Atkinson with us, and we're going to have a great conversation today talking about first impressions. That's Greg's specialty. He's been in the church space for years doing it. And so today we're going to be talking more about how we make sure that our online guests don't get left behind now that a lot of us are starting to reopen. This is going to be an ongoing thing, and we want to make sure that our online presence, our online campuses are always there, ready to engage with first-time guests and to continue to engage with our congregations. And so we're glad to have Greg with us. He's the author of Secrets of a Secret Shopper book that is widely read. And if you don't already have a copy on your shelf, I'm sure you're going to want to get one after this. In addition to his latest Hospitality Ministry Handbook for Volunteers, which is also a great read. Greg is, as I said, in the first impressions evaluation business with churches. And so his consulting agency, Worship Impressions, has been doing this now for many years and used all over the country. And he's also the founder of the First Impressions Conference, which later will give you information on how you can get registered for that, because registration just opened. Did it not, Greg?
Yep.
Awesome. So, all right, well, let's jump in, Scott. Let's get us started on first impressions and engaging with guests in our churches online.
Yeah, so it's one of the things that's really interesting, Greg, is that it was essentially like a 2-week span, either the weekend of March 14th-ish, and then the next weekend, like the weekend of March 21st-ish, whatever those, I might get those dates kind of wrong, but essentially the second and third weeks of March, everybody shut down at the same time, roughly the same time. What's different about now, Greg, is that people are moving back to in-person services at different paces. So it's not like when we shut down. Going back to in-person services is sort of a staggered thing. And what's happening, we're noticing, and is one of the reasons why I want to talk to you, Greg, is that people are getting left behind. You still have people who are tuning in online. Our best guesses, the stats are like a 30%. All the official studies we can see, it's about 30% of your pre-COVID attendance shows back on week one for services. But I've seen anecdotally as many as 50%, 60%, but it's not everybody. So you've got people who normally attend your church who are still attending online. Compounded on that, the first impressions angle of this, Greg, no one is going to risk their life to visit your church. They're going to engage with your church first as a guest online. So all of that being the context, let's just start with a simple question. What is the most important thing for churches to do so that they don't leave their online audience behind as they transition to in-person services?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I can share a little background of this topic for me, and why I'm pretty passionate about it. My friend Steve Hogg founded the Church Online Summit, and it took place about 2 weeks ago. And he had asked me to speak on First Impressions Online. And we've known each other for years, and he knew my passion of First Impressions. But this was a whole online conference dedicated to online Church Online Summit. And so one of the things I talked about in my talk was the movie Avatar. And they said, I see you. And so I said, pastors, when you go forward in this new, what my friend Jeff Reed calls phygital world, physical and digital, as we move forward in this phygital world, you can never leave behind the online audience again. I'm the same way. I last traveled on March 7th and 8th. I went to consult with the church in Baltimore. And then the next week, I haven't gone back to church since. And so it was about that time when everybody started going online. And so for the past 3 months almost, churches have maintained and sustained through online church. And so you don't want to forget that online audience that has carried you these past 3 months. And as you said, even for those, and there's tons of churches across North America that aren't meeting yet. They just released a new capacity framework in Canada. I think it's like 10 people. So, and as far as North America, they're still not meeting in Canada. And then a lot of states, whether it be California or the Northeast, all around the United States, they're not meeting yet. But for the Southeast, where I live, and Texas and some others that have opened up, even those that come back is only about 30 to 40%. Mm-hmm. So that means 60 to 70% of your congregation is still watching online. And where this hits home for me is my church opened back up a month ago. I live in South Carolina, right over the border, the North Carolina border, in the Charlotte metro. And I'm a part of a small church plant. And so they opened up a month ago, and I watched the first week on Facebook Live, and I saw stuff that, freaked me out, because there was no social distancing. The chairs weren't spread apart. They weren't wearing masks. They were hugging each other. So that freaked me out. And I thought, wow, I'm not ready to go back yet. But I watched it the second week. And then the third week I tuned in, and there was no Facebook Live. They just didn't cut the camera on. And they forgot about us at home that aren't ready to come back yet. And so I'm like, what is going on? And I talked to my friend there, and he said, yeah, we just decided not to stream on Facebook Live. And I was like, but you've only got 30% of your congregation coming back. What about all of us at home that are watching? And so it's you don't want to forget those watching online. Not only that, in addition to your 60 to 70% of your church body, your congregation, you have a new audience, because most people's stats went up, and they have people from around the world watching them online. And I think a lot of churches experience 5 times their attendance watching online. And so those people are still watching. And it could be unchurched people or people looking for a church home in your city that have been watching online. And one thing I know personally, having 2 kids with compromised immune systems, and then being sensitive to people like my mom, who just battled breast cancer and had chemotherapy, and anybody with cancer can't be around, their immune system's compromised. They can't be around people in this COVID season. And so for our older congregation, those in that demographic of the 60s, 70s, and 80s that we love and care for, the seniors in our congregation, and then those like myself that have kids with compromised immune systems, we want to be sensitive to that. And so they may love the church and love the mission of the church and love the vision of the church and care about the church, but they're still watching online. And so when I recorded the talk for the Church Online Summit, I said, when you stand up, and I know so many people are so excited to get back together and to meet in person and to see each other again. I said, Pastor, when you stand up in front of your congregation and say, wow, it's so great to see all of you guys here. And for those of you watching online, we're so glad you're tuning in. Do not forget the online audience. And so that's just something I'm very passionate about, because now going forward in this digital world, we do not know who's tuning in, watching us, and what God could be up to in their life.
One of the really interesting things that I've been, I was just coaching a pastor in Indiana a couple days ago. And one of the things that they're navigating is just the very stark differences between physical and digital. And I was thinking about it through the framework of what the movies have been. I know it's a very crass example, I understand. But just imagine if, The Rise of Skywalker, when it premiered on Disney Plus. It's just not the same. It's just not, because going to the movies isn't just about the movie. It's not. It's about the popcorn and people dressed up like Obi-Wan Kenobi, and kids with their lightsabers, and like there's a whole thing about going to a blockbuster when it opens and the feeling that you have. I think you're a movie guy, Greg, aren't you?
Big time.
Yeah. So you get that, right? And when Disney releases something on Disney Plus, it's just, it's the movie's the same. It's just, but the feeling isn't the same. And so as pastors and church leaders, as we're trying to make sure that we're truly discipling our people, there is a loss from the physical to the digital. But we can mitigate that loss, I think. It doesn't have to be, well, this is the only good way to experience this. So what are some of the ways that churches can continue, even as, because now they're going to have to walk and chew gum. They're going to have to spin two plates, the in-person and the online. So how do they bridge that gap so that online doesn't feel like second class?
Yeah, I think a couple things come to mind, and one would be staffing. How do you staff going forward in the new post-COVID reality? I think pastors in the last 3 months have realized what superstars their communication directors are, and their video editors and their video production team.
Assuming they have those people on their team.
Right, if they have that. But like even at my own small church plant, I'm a part of a 50-person church plant. We had our worship leader recording and editing the sermons and uploading them to Facebook and YouTube. And so for whoever that person is on staff, whether they're paid or volunteer or part-time or full-time, whether it be a video person or a comms person, just to value them and to staff for them going forward. I was reading an article earlier today about a pastor that was opening up, but he said, since we started a midweek online prayer, we're going to keep that going forward. And so they're going to gather together on Sunday in person, still streaming for those that are at home. But they had started a midweek prayer thing, like a Facebook Live. And they said, we're going to keep that going as we go forward. We don't want to take that away. And so a lot of churches, I remember watching a church in Atlanta do online devotionals from the pastor. And so a lot of them are going to keep that going. A lot of churches, including my own, have really had great success with Zoom small groups, online small groups. And so we're in a time where people may not feel comfortable opening their homes up and bringing people into their homes that may be sick or asymptomatic, or they don't know if they're carrying something. And so they're sticking with the online group concept. And so still living in that physical and digital world and offering both. But I think I would look at staffing in a new reality, and I would think I would look at programming in a new reality, meaning there's no reason why you can't still do online devotionals and online small groups and online prayer times. And so there are some churches that were doing like a midweek worship online broadcasting through Facebook Live, and they just had the worship leader or worship band in a room streaming on Facebook Live with a camera in front of them, and they would lead worship. A lot of churches are going to continue that and keep that going because people really seem to enjoy it.
Yeah, I was looking at a church earlier this month that actually they treat online, they call it their internet campus, and they have an internet campus pastor. And on Sundays, he actually sort of hosts online before and after the service. He's there as a host, and his contact information is there for people to connect with for prayer needs and all other things. And I thought that was just a really interesting and very 2020 job position in a church now. I don't know how long they've been doing internet campuses. I don't think this is something they just started. I think they've been doing that for a while. But how much are you seeing that? And I wonder what that could look like. How can a smaller church work their way into that?
Yeah, I actually, and you can look this up. Jeff Reed blogged about it and linked to my blog on the Church Digital recently. But I was blogging about internet campuses and internet campus pastors in 2008, 12 years ago. I was blogging about Life Church in Seacoast and Central Christian and Cross Point in Nashville. And so in 2008, I did a whole series where I secret shopped and critiqued and it was complete with screenshots of everything I was seeing on my computer of internet campuses in 2008, 12 years ago. And so it's just been growing and growing and growing now. And so this actually came up. I have a Facebook group, a Weekend Worship and Guest Services Facebook group. And this came up yesterday. Somebody asked about, does anybody know churches that are launching purely online campuses? And
I saw
said,
that comment. Yeah.
Yeah, I said, yes, you need to meet my friend Myron Pierce and Jeff Reed. And they both set up meetings and connected with each other with this pastor that asked the question. But my friend Myron Pierce, who I brought to come speak to my church here in Rock Hill, South Carolina, I brought him in to speak to our church plant, and I invited him to our Atlanta First Impressions Conference, and he spoke there last year. But and I have actually been to his church in Omaha, Nebraska. He's an inner city church planter, and I've been and visited his church, and they all read my book, Secrets of the Secret Shopper, and just doing great things with first impressions in an inner city context. But Myron really caught on to this digi-church concept that he calls it. And so they just started launching digi-churches, and they have them all over the world. I think they have one in Berlin, but they have these digi-churches that are completely online churches. And so a friend of mine that lives here in Rock Hill, South Carolina, where I live, wanted to be a church planner. And when I brought Myron in to speak to our team, they connected and they stayed in touch and they became friends. And just yesterday, I got an invite on Facebook to a new digi-church campus page for this Mission Church Rock Hill. Mission Church is Myron's church in Omaha, Nebraska. And then my friend Ori, who I introduced those two together, launched Mission Church Rock Hill completely online. And so it's happening, and it's economic, it's budget friendly. You need a phone and an ability to record a message and go live. But a lot of churches, one of the things that I've appreciated about Life Church is their innovation. And so a lot of churches are getting really creative and really innovative and being lean and mean when it comes to budget and launching these completely online campuses that don't really take a lot of budget line items. They just, they're lean and mean, and they're broadcasting the gospel around the world, which is the beautiful thing about, as you said, an internet campus is it's across the internet, so you can watch from anywhere in the world.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate for 5 seconds, right? And I'm with you 100%. I think this is such a critical shift. One of the things that your friend Carrie Newhoff and others are advocating for in such a healthy way, and I think it's so important, is to measure engagement more than attendance, right? Mm-hmm. That engagement is such a far more critical statistic than engagement. The challenge is that when we look at digital forms of communication and digital forms of ministry, lots of times what we get is just essentially rehashed attendance metrics. How many views did we get on something? Did someone log into a Zoom meeting? Which is not necessarily truly an engagement metric. Now, we have things that we would kind of advocate for from the Malfers Group and the work that we do with churches. But I'm just curious your perspective, given how easy it is to get vanity metrics that are essentially just 2.0 versions of attendance metrics when doing online church. How do we really measure discipleship level engagement and not just a new version of old metrics? We're substituting a rear end in a seat in a pew for a rear end in a couch watching a clip or a message on Facebook or YouTube.
Yeah, I was going to say, I know you're playing devil's advocate, but you mentioned the rear end in the pew. I was going to say, I grew up in a traditional Baptist church where you had people sleeping through the sermon. So the whole attendance thing's been happening since the 80s.
100%. Yeah. It's been going on forever. Yeah. But we work all the time trying to get churches away from that being the most important.
We've all consulted with a lot of First Baptist churches or historic churches and older churches. And so just because you're there in person doesn't mean you're necessarily getting discipled or paying attention or even awake. And so that's happened for years, where when the organ postlude kicks in, that's when somebody wakes up and then they stand up and leave. And so
time to go to Luby's.
Yeah. But what I have seen on the opposite side is a lot of people being reached and discipled through digital means, whether it be a Zoom small group or even the online church. The gospel, what's been cool through this coronavirus COVID-19 season these past 3 months is the gospel has been proclaimed like no time in history. because of the metrics and because of churches using the internet, we have actually, as the Big C Church, reached more people with the good news of the gospel in the last 3 months than any time ever before in history. So it's not like we were told we couldn't proclaim the gospel. Nobody was putting the church down. Nobody was restricting the good news. Nobody said they're not allowing churches to proclaim the good news. I saw somebody try to argue that online. And I said, the church has never been stopped from proclaiming the good news. It's going out times 5. Most churches are reaching 5 times their community. So it's been broadcasted. One of the things that's neat, I try to watch Stephen Furtick at Elevation Church every week because they do some creative stuff. And he's really good with engagement. You know, you said Carrie Newhoff and Andy Stanley and others have been talking about don't track attendance, track engagement. And so what they did at Elevation Church here in Charlotte, in my backyard, is they put a big prompt screen in the back. A lot of churches have a confidence monitor or a prompt screen. They put a big one in the back that displayed all of the comments. And so Stephen Furtick, as he was preaching every week, has interacted with the commenters live in real time. And so he would say, hey, Bob in Topeka, Kansas, I see you. Hey, Fred in Phoenix, Arizona, what are you eating for lunch? And he would talk to these people in Tokyo and Singapore and Korea and just interact with all these comments. And he would say, type this into the chat. And he was interacting in real time with people through this genius idea of the prompt screen in the back. And so there's a lot of ways that you can keep people awake and engaged and interacting. And my talk at the Church Online Summit, I talked about Leonard Sweet's old concept that he talked about in a book years ago of EPIC, you know, the experiential, participatory, image-driven, connective. He talked about EPIC worship gatherings for years, for well over a decade. And so we want it to still be experiential. We want it to be participatory. We want it to be connective and like a community aspect. And so
to your point, there's been a lot of churches for a long time that weren't that way, even in person.
Yeah,
right. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, we've had pew fillers for years. You know, people that just take up a pew, check off a box. Yes, I went to church, and they were never engaged. They never served. They never gave. They were never in a small group. They just sat in a pew, checked the box, and left. Whereas right now, a lot of people are really getting involved in online small groups and online even chat hosts and moderators and facilitators. There's been a lot of volunteers serving in chat functions where they are commenting and interacting with guests and with the congregation. And so there's been a lot of neat ways for people to get plugged in and interact in this season. And so one of the things that I am passionate about and that we're talking about here today is, regardless of where you live in North America, sooner or later, you'll be gathering back together. It may not be June, it may be July, it may be September. I know some churches that have talked about 2021, but eventually you'll get back together. And my hope and prayer is that when that day comes, that you still are looking into the camera and not forgetting those people at home. If you ever watch Craig Rochelle at Life Church, he just stares down the barrel of the camera. He just stares it down, because they have a bigger audience watching online than they do in person. Even though they're the largest church in the country, they have a larger audience online. I remember reading an article from Life Church that said that, I think this number is right. I remember it was 3 times. I think pre-COVID, every week through their online campuses, they would have about 5,000 salvations. The first week of COVID and not being able to meet in person, they had 15,000 salvations.
Wow. 3
times as many. And so the gospel's getting proclaimed, people are getting reached. And you know, when I look at, you know, thinking of the Apostle Paul, by any means necessary, whatever we can do to get it out, would the disciples, would Jesus use technology? Absolutely. Let's use everything we can, become all things to all people. You know, when you think about the Apostle Paul, his writings, his letters to the church, he wasn't there in person. They were reading letters that he was written, kind of like emails. They were reading emails that he had written. He wasn't there in person speaking to them face to face. And we today still read those letters, even though the Apostle Paul isn't staring us in the face, looking at us in person. And so we want to still be as creative and innovative as possible and use technology to the full.
I think one of the challenges that I've seen just too few churches do particularly well, if I'm being completely honest. I mean, they might say, "Hey, if you're a guest, wave," or something. But churches are still really struggling to get guests to self-identify in services, to comment, and then to translate that, even if they did, to translate that into any sort of a concrete follow-up system. Now, let me sidebar that. Churches were not good at taking a guest connect card in person and translating that into a good follow-up system. So it's really just amplifying the problem that already existed. It's not so much of a new problem, but it's the same problem in a new way. And there are a lot of churches, I'm not trying to slam anybody, but they're just wholly unequipped to translate that person who says, "Hey, I'm new," into a relationship, which is what we want to see happen. So what are you saying that's working there? And how do you, again, walk and chew gum at the same time? Like now I've got connect cards to deal with and guests online to deal with. How do we pivot that into the same sort of follow-up process?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think one of the easiest ways is to just go to, as much as you can possibly, to just go completely digital, because it resonates with the people in the room and online. And so having a digital online connection card or a text, "I'm new," text 555, "I'm new," whatever your number may be, or "I decided," or "salvation," or "welcome." People use different kind of texting options like Text in Church and other companies. But you can text to give, you can text a connection card, you can do an online connection card, digital connection card. And one of the things that I said on a couple other webinars and podcasts is that I've seen work well, and I actually wrote a blog post. I've done, I think, 3 different COVID-specific blog posts in a row on my blog, gregatkinson.com. But I wrote one about what your homepage of your church website should look like right now. And I'll link to various examples of great churches in America that have totally revamped their homepage. For example, back, let's say a month ago, if the church wasn't meeting, and most churches that I know of aren't meeting still today, but if they weren't meeting a month ago, there's no need to go to the church homepage and see directions and service times. What they should see is next service in like a countdown to the next time that it's going to be broadcast. They don't need a map to the church because we're not meeting at the church. And they don't need to know about your children's ministry because there is no children's ministry right now. And so I linked to examples of churches that have totally revamped their homepage. And one of the things that somebody said was working well was having an online connection card that just lived on their homepage, so that if people stumbled across your church website during the week, even not on a Sunday, let's say it's a Tuesday night, they can go ahead and fill out that connection card. And so a lot of times, like for me, when I'm at home watching church online, and I watch several services from churches around the country every week, or actually around the world every week, but I use my Roku on my television. So I'm sitting on my couch looking up at a television screen, and I don't have a laptop in front of me. So if somebody were to say, type this in the comments or fill out this card, I don't have anything in front of me. I'm just watching a television screen. However, later, if I'm at my desk or I'm on my laptop or I'm on my phone and I'm scrolling through a church website, I can fill that connection card out on my own time if it's posted there. And so I would leave that on your church homepage. Even going forward, when you open back up and you have stuff that's relevant, like I'm new or what to expect or plan a visit. By the way, plan a visit, which was just getting popular and picking up steam pre-COVID, is never going to be as important as going forward, because churches that are opening back up and doing it with excellence and doing it well that I've been keeping an eye on are having people reserve seats and do ticketing. And so plan a visit is very important right now because most states have capacity issues and only allow so much attendance there, whether some states is 25% capacity attendance. Some states like California, it's no more than 100 people. Well, if you have an auditorium that seats 1,500 and you can't have any more than 100 people, you're going to have to do some sort of ticketing system. So the way we use plan a visit is going to have to be tweaked for the good. So let's put plan a visit back up prominent on the homepage. And then let's say, click here to reserve your seat. And it doesn't have to be like J9. It's just you have a seat and you know when you've reached capacity and you can close off that service and say, sold out or closed out or whatever. But yeah, using an online connection card, online giving. This is not a good time to be passing a plate because of germs and the virus spreading. And so people are using mounted giving boxes where they just drop it in a slot, or online giving or text to give. And so let's try to pivot now for the best in a 21st century paradigm to as much online as we can. Online giving, text to give, text connection card, online connection card, online small groups, online devotionals. Let's try to pivot as much as we can online because we live in a digital culture, a digital world.
You go ahead.
Go ahead, Scott.
Well, I was just going to comment on that. This may be a better question for Tyler from Texan Church. We should probably have him on here sometime. But, it would be, I think one of the things that I've liked about Texan Church, and we're not affiliates with, you might be an affiliate with him, I'm not. But I like how Texan Church, their plan a visit module that you can have on your website is more like a chat type feature. I think that works really well. I think people respond really well to that. It'd be nice if that could function almost like a digital connect card. Well, like, I want to attend online or I want to attend digitally, and let, kind of have that sit there on that homepage, not blasting you when you first log in, but like a little chat bubble, like you see on a lot of websites that run intercom or whatever. I just really like Texan Church's plan a visit module that they have for websites. I think it's one of the better implementations of a plan a visit that I see anywhere else. And I look at a lot of websites like you do, I'm sure. So, anyways, just a thought. I'd love to talk to Tyler about how that module has shifted or been customized in light of COVID. I'm sure that would be an interesting conversation. You might know something about that. I don't.
I do. Yeah, and I'm a partner and affiliate of them, but I also helped a brand new company that's just getting launched create their own version of it. It was a project that I was hired to oversee, a brand new product called Preface, which, think of like preface, before you ever come. We created our own plan your visit experience, which was based off a couple different things that we liked, and then our own ideas. But basically, it's very conversational. It's like a chat. It's very intuitive, and it just speaks to you like we're having a conversation like this. Like, would you like to see this? Are you interested in this? And then it kind of takes you based on your answers. But it's a company called Communitas, and so that's a product that they'll be rolling out in the near future. That all I did was I'm not getting paid from it now, so I don't make it's not. I think it's a free product anyways. But all I did was help design it. But there's going to be a lot, and then there's planyourvisit.com, which is another friend of mine, Daniel Ermler. There's a lot of companies that are using these type of models, but as we reopen responsibly, if we're going to do this right and not bust through and break capacity issues or have too many people in a confined space, we're going to have to use a plan your visit type model. But yeah, I like the Texan Church format. I like how conversational it is and simple and succinct and concise, but very well done.
I checked out a church last Sunday that everything seemed like, I think they were doing a lot of things well, and they were telling guests to go to their virtual lobby after the service. And they said, link in the chat. And so I was like, oh, cool. Yeah, I want to check out and see what these guys are doing. And I clicked it, and it was wanting to launch a Zoom meeting. And I immediately shut it down. I was like, oh my gosh, I'm sitting, in my pajama shorts and a stained Malfers Group t-shirt. I'm like, I don't want to get in a Zoom meeting. It hadn't even occurred to me. I don't even have a camera connected to that computer. But I just thought to myself then, well, how many other people have maybe enjoyed this worship service and they were interested, but they're like, no, I don't want to commit to a Zoom meeting with you. So I think there's got to be some practices that churches can do that'll be inviting and not intimidating, to make sure that somebody that just maybe spent an hour and a half with them will want to take the next step. You
may have felt better about it if you had known in advance that it was going to be Zoom.
That may have been it. If it just maybe at first took you to a page like, hey, this is a Zoom thing where it's going to be a one-on-one, or there's going to be 100 people there. I don't know. And we don't need to see you. You can just see us. Any of that would have been better, but I had a knee-jerk reaction and closed it as soon as I could.
I did the same thing last week. I had the exact same experience happen to me.
So I guess we definitely
opened up on camera and didn't realize it.
Well, people want to. Here's the thing we're learning: people want to creep on things. Like, I want to be able to go into your lobby, but I don't want you to see me there. It's just an interesting psychology to that. It's no different than in real life. I mean, if you're visiting a church, you kind of, you want to be noticed, but you don't want to be over noticed. And there's that balance. So That's interesting. Greg, what other insight, as we begin to wrap this up, if there was one thing that you would want churches to remember on, like if they've tuned out until now, that now the choir organ has started towards the end of this podcast, and you want them to remember just one thing on how not to leave their online audience behind as they begin to transition back over the next weeks and months into in-person services, what's the one thing that you would want them to remember so that they don't leave that online audience behind?
I think it's just simply that. Don't leave your online audience behind. There's always somebody watching through the camera now. For me, week 3, so 4 weeks ago, my home church started back meeting online. Week 3, when I went to go to Facebook to tune in and watch from my couch at home, to see that they weren't streaming was like a slap in the face. It was kind of like, well, you should be here in person. And there was no consideration or respect for maybe some people aren't ready to come back yet. Because not only do I have kids with compromised immune system, but I've been going through my own health issues. A lot of people that follow me online know I was at the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota last fall. I spent Thanksgiving at the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. I've had all kinds of health issues. Or for somebody like my mom that's not going out in public at all because she's a breast cancer survivor and just finished chemotherapy, and her immune system is compromised and weak, and she can't even catch a cold. She can't be around anybody, going through chemo. And so let's not forget these people. They're no less important. They don't lack faith. They love God. They love Jesus just as much. They're just not comfortable coming back around people yet. And so let's continue looking at the camera and addressing them and thanking them for tuning in. And let's just see it as an expansion of who we reach in person. You may have somebody that lives 30 minutes away and they're not willing to drive 30 minutes, but they tune in and they watch, and we can still reach them and encourage them each week. And so let's just see it as a big C church thing, as a kingdom thing, that we can reach people that aren't physically in the building in this physical and digital world. So as we move forward, let's keep a foot in both worlds, physical and digital, and never take for granted or slight or think anything negative about those that choose to watch online, because for whatever reason, that may be more comfortable for them, especially, and I know this sounds painful, but for a lot of people, especially until there's a vaccine, they're probably just going to tune in and watch. That's why you have 30% of your congregation has shown back up. What does that tell you? That means 70% has not. Let's not forget those people. They're just as important and they're just as worthy. And so let's keep addressing them through our cameras.
Yeah. I've seen, we talked about this a couple episodes ago on the podcast, but there's as few as 10%, as many as maybe 25% of folks who are in that camp where they're not going to feel comfortable going anywhere until there's a vaccine. And that might feel like an extreme position to some of us, but it's where they're at. And to your point, there are people that still need to hear and be connected to, they need to hear the love of Jesus and the gospel of Jesus, and they need to be connected to other believers. And then, you've got that 40% of people who are in that messy middle, and they'll make their way back to your church eventually, but it may be weeks or months before they're ready. Yeah. So good. Greg, how can people connect with you? How can people, just get connected to what you're doing and be blessed by the resources that you put out?
Well, as you guys introduced me, my name's Greg Atkinson. So if you go to gregatkinson.com, you'll have links to all my social media. I'm at Greg Atkinson on Twitter and Instagram. But if you go to gregatkinson.com, there are social links at the top right that link you to my Facebook and LinkedIn and Instagram and Twitter. And then Worship Impressions is my company if you want to read more about what I do. But on gregatkinson.com, there's a tab that says resources, and it links to books I've written that are some great resources. There's a book that I wrote actually 10 years ago. It didn't come out 10 years ago, but I wrote it 10 years ago in 2010 called Strange Leadership. It's the big orange button book behind me. It's 330 pages. And it's about how to lead an innovative organization, 40 ways to lead an innovative organization. And I talked about a lot of things that are very relevant right now today, and I wrote it 10 years ago. And that orange book behind me is the second revised edition that just came out 2 years ago. But you can get links to the resources and books I've written on my website. And then check out firstimpressionsconference.com. We just opened up registration for the First Impressions Conference. Our new theme for this year, last year our theme was the hospitality culture. And we focused on culture and creating a culture of hospitality. This year we waited to pull the trigger and just seeing what was going on in the world. And then we pushed the date back to November so we can get a real true lay of the land and see what the Big C Church looks like come fall. So November 4th through 6th, when things have shaken out and we kind of know what's going on in the world. And we're going to do another online conference, so you don't have to travel if you're worried about that second wave or whatever the fall may look like. There's no travel. You can log on from your home or office or church. But firstimpressionsconference.com, our new theme this year is navigating a new season. I was toying around with the idea of a new normal. And we hear the new normal, next normal thrown around a lot these days. And a friend of mine that's a Story Brand certified guide and a copywriter messaged me, and he said, new normal's getting played out. I would stay away from that. He said, what do you think about new season? It has more of a biblical connotation because there's so many seasons throughout Scripture and throughout the Christian life. And so he said, this is a new season for the church. And so our theme this year focused on a blending of first impressions and communications, bringing those two together, navigating a new season. And so for me as a secret shopper, when I go evaluate a church, when I go consult with the church, I'm not just looking at first impressions. I'm looking at communications. I want to know, what does their signage look like? I want to know, what does their printed pieces look like? What does their bulletin look like? Their connection card, their wayfinding signage, typography, everything. And so this is a merging of first impressions and communications, navigating a new season. And so for the first time, every year we have different speakers. This will be our fourth conference. For the first time this year, we're going to have a lot of church comm voices, a lot of church communicators speaking at the conference and helping people think through that through the eyes of first impressions. So it'll be pretty cool.
That's great. Well, Greg, thanks so much for being with us today, man. It was a pleasure to have you.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Well,
Honor.
you can find out more about Greg at gregatkinson.com. We will also link to that in our show notes that you can get at from malfersgroup.com/43. This is our 43rd episode this week. And it's our pleasure to have you with us as it is every week. So thank you to all of you listening and watching out there. Scott and I will be back next week with some new content for you. And in the meantime, just check out malfersgroup.com/43. Where you can find out more about the Malfers Group, or what we do to help churches be better disciple makers, and of course what Greg does to help make sure that they look good doing it and that they're effective at it. So thanks again, Greg. We pray you all be blessed, and we'll see you next week.